So welcome to the plenary session, Transforming Communities Through Higher Education, the Louisville Experience. My name is Erica Plater-Turner. I'm Managing Director of Professional Development at the Council on Foundations. I'm your staff liaison for this event, so if you have any questions about the council, about the conference as we wrap up, please be sure to see me at any given time. I just want to quickly remind you to please complete your evaluations. You can do it through the conference app, which you can download to your phone if you haven't already, or we will be sending out to you a link via email where you can give us your feedback on this plenary session. In addition, this is going to be recorded, so if you have questions, we do ask you to step to the mic in the middle of the room. In addition, our speakers will make sure they repeat the question so we can capture that information. So welcome to the plenary. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panel.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thanks very much. I'm Jim Applegate. I'm Vice President for Program Development, head our grant making at the Lumina Foundation. The Lumina Foundation, as most of you know us probably, is the largest foundation, national foundation in the country that's solely focused on one idea, one goal. And that goal we call Goal 2025. Some of you I know I see some familiar faces. We're at our convening in Indianapolis not that long ago where we went into some depth on that. But the goal, very simply, is to increase the proportion of Americans with a high quality, and that should probably be underlined and emphasized, high quality degrees and credentials, and to move that to 60% by 2025. Now, that is an audacious goal for the country. We have been stuck around 40% for several decades. Several decades ago, that was good enough to make us best in the world. Today, among our younger workforce at least, the 25 to 34-year-olds, the future of our workforce, we've now slipped to 15th among the developed countries of the world. So it's an urgent need. Our analyses by folks like Tony Carnevale at the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce have shown that by 2018 even, not 2025, almost two-thirds of the jobs in this country will require some form of post-secondary credential or education. So without an audacious move to up the ante on the education level of our workforce, the skills gap that we're already hearing so much about will only worsen, and our ability to recover from this great recession will be hindered. I want to get to the panel very quickly. I'll introduce them, and we want to have a discussion about how Louisville has embraced this challenge of really, and why they've embraced this challenge to really elevate the education attainment levels in their city as a way to enhance quality of life and economic development. But I want to show you just one data slide, and this comes from, which I think is pretty dramatic, and you don't need to be able to read all the words. I'll tell you what the lines mean. This is an analysis of what's happened to jobs. We have a little bit of a conversation going on about job creation in the current campaign season since 2007. The green line is what's happened to jobs for college graduates, four-year college graduates. As you can see, this is data, by the way, comes from a wonderful report which you might be interested in taking a look at, again from the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, called the College Advantage. The College Advantage. And what you see here is the job market for four-year college graduates has more than recovered. There are more jobs available now than there were before the recession for those folks. The red line is for those with associate degrees, and what you see there is that it has basically recovered. It's back to where we were before this great recession. The line that is disappearing off the bottom of the chart are jobs available for people with high school credentials. And not only did that plummet, as you can see, so much faster, it continues to fall even during the recovery. So what has happened, if anything, in this great recession is the restructuring of the economy has made the urgency of this move to provide the opportunity for people to not only have access to post-secondary education in our communities, but to finish it, to complete it with degrees and credentials that really do match with the regional job market, that provide the opportunity for that kind of outcome. So today, again, we want to put the focus to be on we want to give you one example of a city that's pulled together in a very admirable way, has been doing it for a while, has managed to sustain it. We have Mary Gwen Wheeler, who is the executive director of the program, which is labeled 55,000 degrees, and we'll explain what that all means a little bit later. We also have Kathy Zandona, who is VP for Education for the Chamber of Commerce. And Susan Berry on my far left, who is the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Louisville. And I think just in their representation, you begin to see the kind of components of the community that have come together to really drive this agenda in Louisville. So let me start with this 55,000 degrees and just ask, you might want to talk a little bit about what it is, but also what put Louisville on this road? I mean, what is it that really started this? And we'll just open it up for questions for all of you. We want this to be a conversation. And again, if you have a question during this conversation, feel free to come up and ask it, but we'll also hold some time, as I said at the end, for you to ask any questions you might have about how this might be translatable, adaptable to your communities. So why? Why did Louisville jump on this train?
Well, Jim, I'll start with just a little bit about what 55,000 degrees is. That is, so I'm not in my mic now? Can you hear me now? Let's see. Does that help? Can everybody hear me now? Still not yes? Yes. So 55,000 degrees is our community goal as well as the name of our program and organization. What it is a 2020 goal to move our community from about a third of our population having a college degree to half, 50%. And that translates to 40,000 more bachelor degrees, 15,000 more associate degrees from the time we started measuring. And we really started, Jim, with many of you have communities that may have done some kind of scorecard for how your community is doing. We did a very big one when we merged our city-county government in 2002. 2003 was when the new government came into power. And at that time, a number of local foundations, including the Community Foundation, joined together to pay for a study to really take a deep dive look at how our community was doing. So Brookings Institution came in and did a report called Beyond Merger. And they looked at a variety of aspects and ended up sort of settling on three deep drivers. The biggest one that jumped out in front of everybody was this education gap. And we also do our comparison, and we could move forward one slide.
Absolutely. I'll just hand it to you and let you drive the train now.
So there's some websites. Lumina. We can come back to those. We did our comparison in a competitor city framework. These are peer cities to Louisville. And this is where we stood in 2010. Actually, we were even lower when we first started measuring this with that Beyond Merger study. And each year, the Greater Louisville Project, which was the group that came together to continue to put out an annual scorecard on this, each year they would look at this competitor city framework. And we were in the bottom tier of our competitor cities in education attainment. And things sort of gathered. The business community was looking at this. Higher ed was looking at this. And the mayor ended up pulling together a roundtable of higher ed leaders, the business community who had already started to study what they could do to move this forward, our K-12 systems, social groups like the Metro United Way and the Urban League all came together to say, what can we do? And we had a retreat in 2009 that set a goal. We wanted to move from that bottom tier up to the top tier, and to do that would be this 40% of our population needing a bachelor's degree, and we also wanted to set an associate's degree goal so that college was in reach for everybody that we were sending this message to, and that's how we got to this goal.
Okay. And so as you were beginning to build, as you're building the momentum for this, I mean, obviously you had a lot of people on board, it sounds like. Was there any persuading you had to do? I mean, maybe a little bit of the, what was the work in trying to build the momentum and the necessary coalitions that were needed to make this happen?
You want to talk about business?
I think that what we looked at from the perspective of partnering, from the Chamber's perspective, we had been active in education from the early 2000s. We partnered with the mayor's office at that time on a program called Everyone Reads. So we knew how to partner and work together. And what we began seeing after this data came out and the business leaders looked at you know, only, at that point, really, it was 29% of the adult population with bachelor's degrees. They were real sure that wasn't going to get us to where we needed to go on economic prosperity, economic development, growing the businesses in our community, and bringing in more businesses. So we sat down and we began seeing who we needed to partner with and talk to, and we continued the collaboration with the mayor's office, and we're at the table when the mayor first called the round table together. And I think if the question is I think it is all about the work that's done behind the scenes in many ways. It's about making sure that everybody understood what our goal was, which was a single goal. We knew exactly where we wanted to go. We wanted to get everybody on board to help us achieve this 55,000 more degrees by 2020. So the collaboration meant university presidents needed to be staffed. They needed to understand what their role could be. Business leaders needed to probably, I can say this, they needed to kind of calm down and look at themselves more as a partner versus you need to fix this. So business leaders had to make a decision that we were willing to be in the game. We wanted to help. We wanted to look for ways that the business community could play a role. So that would just be a few things that I think were important in our early work.
Yeah.
From the Community Foundation perspective, we've been involved with, Mary Gwen mentioned the Greater Louisville project, and we were a founder and funder of that project. But we were really behind the scenes. I came to the foundation in 2009, and I think our philosophy at that point was stay behind the scenes, be a funder, and don't step out. Most people, many people in the community didn't know about the Community Foundation, and even those players in the community didn't even know we were funding the Greater Louisville project. In 2009, you know, when this kind of bubbled up, I think that was a turning point for the Community Foundation, thinking of ourselves as different from simply a grant maker and funder, and thinking about, well, what can we do? Not let's fix this, what can we do to get involved? And that's when we sort of went full throttle and decided that we've been involved in this game for 10 years, funding the Greater Louisville project at $25,000 or $50,000 a year along with some other funders, and thought, well, why don't we take a deep dive? We're looking at the community leadership model. Didn't have much discretionary dollars. We could, you know, 100,000 here, 100,000 there. We realized we weren't really going to make system change by continuing to be a typical grant maker. So we decided, as I mentioned, the full throttle to put all our resources into, most of our resources into public education, with 55,000 degrees being sort of the premier program that we were going to get behind.
Okay. And in Louisville, you've taken a relatively comprehensive approach to reach this goal. You're looking at the K-12 pipeline. I know we're involved with you on the adult learner piece. So could you talk a little bit about the tactics and strategies you're using to address these different issues? I guess each community sort of has to figure out, with its data, as you've done, where its sweet spots are and where it really has the opportunity to up the ante on its education level, and that's going to vary. But from the work you're doing, you're taking a fairly comprehensive approach. So how are you tackling, some examples maybe of how you're tackling these different components of the solution to this challenge?
I think the cross-sector partnership was very key in this. Setting a leadership table, first of all, was very important, that represented business, civic, government, and education, both K-12 and higher ed. And with that group, after setting this goal, we took another 6 months or so to really develop some key strategies, and we identified 5 main objectives that were really addressing the barriers to college attainment. One was creating a more college-going culture. So that's, you know, in a manufacturing community like ours had been, helping people to understand that even though some of those jobs have come back to Louisville, Ford has reinvested and so has GE, but there are fewer jobs and they have a higher expectation for the skills that are needed. But to help change that mindset. A second area was engaging that business community, specifically for those adults. We had 100,000 adults in our community that had some college and no degree. Can the business community reach out as employers and help their employees come back? We also knew that we needed to better align our K-12 and higher ed and make sure that K-12 was producing people college ready and that we could reduce remediation rates of when students got to college. We knew that access and affordability mattered. And we knew that once they got to college, too many people were not completing. Lumina has done a great job at really helping this nation understand the low graduation rates of so many of our universities. We were somewhere around 30%, and we're needing to move higher for that in our community. So those objectives were set, and we launched as an organization, and at that point, it was very important that we had this sort of broad sector-based and objective perspective, and the Community Foundation stepped up at that point to host us, to be our fiscal agent, so that we could continue to have this sort of neutral, objective role in the community. And the very first thing we did, strategy, was to produce a report that is a benchmark report on all those objectives I just said that had indicators of where we need to go. So obviously, that helped us focus specifically on, if we have a 2020 goal, it's very ambitious. We were sort of at the upper end of the pipeline, education pipeline focused. And I'll just take a little moment to share a study that, again, the Greater Louisville Project did, which was a cohort analysis in our community of where people were dropping out. About 10,000 people are born in Louisville every year. And as you can see, at each stage along the way, only 68%, if I'm reading right, actually graduate high school of that 10,000 that are born. And in each stage, entering college and then finishing college, we're losing, so that only about 25% of an average cohort are getting a college degree of some sort, associate's degree or higher. So we knew this is where we needed to focus on some of those dropout points.
And Susan, Mary Gwen mentioned the role of the Community Foundation in convening and being a neutral. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that is, one of the, in our conversations, for those of you who were in Indianapolis with us and talking about the role of community foundations, we know that there are foundations who have different emphases, actually at different points of this pipeline. I mean, some folks are funding third-grade reading programs or after-school programs. Some are on high school dropout prevention. But, the idea that the Community Foundation could play a role in bringing the community together, right, so that somebody is talking and working on all of that as opposed to, anyway, a little bit about the role. Yeah.
Well, I think we didn't have the resources to focus on any single piece of that. I can't say enough about how important this pipeline was. You can have pages and pages and reams of data, but this pipeline was really a catalyst, because in a snapshot, I'm a visual learner, and I think many people are, in a snapshot we saw how many people were losing. And that really, I think everyone could look at that and say we have to do something about it. From the Community Foundation perspective, we're a $350 million foundation, many donor-advised funds, very little, we're only 27 years old, very few discretionary dollars. So for us to tackle any particular piece, we didn't feel we could be effective. But what we did think we could be effective at, and I don't know that we made the decision, it sort of happened over time with first the Greater Louisville Project and now with 55,000 Degrees, is perhaps we could provide some supporting services, some funding, the hosting. 55,000 Degree staff members are in our offices. They're our employees. They share our services from our receptionist to telephone to, and I think after a little bit more than a year, I feel like they're part of our community and we're part of their community. We have a big meeting room at the foundation, so 55,000 Degrees meets at the foundation. And for those of you who are thinking about your brand and community, when someone says, I'm going to the Community Foundation for this meeting, time after time after time, having that happen, it really works well that people can turn to us. So there wasn't a lot of money, and there still isn't a lot of money. That's why we're going to start looking at impact investing. but the truth is we found a way to be at the table, and that was purposeful. That was a board decision. We wanted to be at the table and use the resources we had. I'm a big believer in having skin in the game, so we just didn't host meetings. We needed to be a funder and supporter. But to provide those services that no other organization could provide in community, and that was the convening and organizing.
You know, and one of the reasons that we were so interested in this work in Louisville, there are many reasons, but one was the concept of it really is a public-private partnership. And, you know, that's why we sent our videographers down. That's, if you go on our website, we've got kind of the Louisville story there. So I don't know, Kathy, whether you or who wants to maybe talk about what that does for this in terms of it being this public-private partnerships, in terms of sustainability, in terms of impact, et cetera. I don't know who wants to talk about that.
Let's talk about that. I think I'll start by just saying, I think from our perspective, it kind of made it a neutral playing field. It's out there. It allows everybody to be involved and engaged, and it's not like if it had been housed at a business or at a university, then it would have become, that's the university's program, or that's the business program. So this public-private partnership with the mayor as the chairman of the board leading it, I think has been critical to keep everybody at the table, and at the table with equal voice and making a difference. So when the mayor calls, which is an interesting thing, when the mayor calls, everybody comes. So it's very nice, and he is 100% behind this. He truly believes that we need to make sure we have a good data system that we're measuring from and help us to move forward. And he is pushing every member, and on the back of the report on your table, 23 individuals signed the initial Greater Louisville Education Commitment. And he is holding each of those individuals and their companies, their schools, their civic organization to task. What are you doing to help make this happen? What's your role in increasing the number of bachelor's and associate degrees by 2020? So that'd be kind of a perspective for mine. Maybe you have a different one?
And it's interesting, is you might imagine the business community and the higher ed community in particular sort of looked at this thing a little differently, and they didn't always agree on either process or outcomes. And having that neutral, actually the mayor being a convener was very important. When this first started, I was the education advisor for Mayor Abramson, who is now our lieutenant governor in the state of Kentucky. And he was the first metro mayor. He'd had, people called him mayor for life. Everybody thought maybe this could only survive because it was Mayor Abramson. When he announced that he was running for lieutenant governor, the group really, that's when we really formed. We then became independent, launched as an independent organization because all of those players had become invested in this lasting beyond one single leader's leadership. And we're very happy that the next mayor did step up and has put his own imprint on it. He's a businessman in his background, and so he's got very much this idea of performance management. Let's make sure we break down this large goal of 55,000 degrees and get everybody in the community to step up. And he's helped us launch something we're calling sort of, how do we get there, 1 degree at a time? So we want everybody to be counted in. And so we've launched a Count Me In campaign that it spread that responsibility for this community goal even more broadly. So that was some rocky beginnings that having that broad table really helped us move forward.
And I'm sure you created messages and materials, 55,000 degrees. Obviously, we were talking earlier, setting the goal is big. I mean, because if you don't, and setting a good goal that's data based in data as opposed to, I don't know, picking one off the shelf. But how did you think about? I mean, you obviously have gotten this buy-in. What messaging, the materials? What were some of the lessons learned or some of the things you found? Obviously, this pipeline chart was very effective in getting people to understand the problem. What else? We
launched very publicly, as Kathy said. We had a signing ceremony. And then at that ceremony was when we said that we were setting this goal. It was remarkable how that single goal, people get it very quickly. When over the next, we launched, we signed, but we hadn't formed the organization. The business community got GLI, actually, Greater Louisville Inc., the chamber, lent us their creative folk to help come up with a name. And when they first said, well, just name it your goal, 55,000 degrees, I said, oh, come on, that's crazy.
I said it was great.
And everybody else luckily said it was
I loved
great
it.
because it has been very, very important in our ability to communicate because people get it right away. That's where we're going. That's exactly what we're trying to do, and they understand it. And putting the little cap, graduation cap on all of our materials, you'll see it, all our logos. That helps people understand we're not talking about temperature. We're talking about college degrees. And luckily, we found
So
out...
this is not a climate change
Well,
initiative.
Climate change initiative.
serendipitously, we discovered that 55,000 degrees is the temperature of a lightning strike. So we have that ability to say we're really changing our community.
And notice we have not used that in any of our marketing materials to date.
I just wanted to mention also that when we did launch, we were able to, from that time we signed until we launched, we were able to bring together funders in the community, local foundations, to raise over $1 million so that when we launched, we had 3 years of sustainable funding. And it wasn't long after that that Lumina Foundation also helped us with that particular outreach, funding the Chamber to do an employer and employee engagement outreach for adults, helping adults to return to college. So just wanted to share with you the list of funders that local, private, corporate, and family foundations and the community foundation.
And while it's a great list, and I think it really didn't happen overnight. Louisville, as I mentioned, I came to Louisville in 2009, but really fell into a program where most of the foundations in the community, the large foundations, were working together on the Greater Louisville project. We also have a very active donors forum in Louisville, so the major players, the foundations with the largest assets and the most money to put into play in the community, were already meeting and interested. First, because we had all been funders and founders of the Greater Louisville project, this just seemed to make sense. And we found time after time that by working together and by communicating, remember we're in the relationship building business, so as CEOs we get together. We actually have breakfast once a month together. We meet in the Donors Forum quarterly, and we're all active with 55,000 degrees, not simply as funders, but interested in the programmatic side of things and special projects we might be funding outside of 55,000 degrees.
Yeah. You know, and I might do, so I'm going to give a little airtime to Memphis here. Is that okay?
Please. Yeah.
I was
All
visiting
part of this
Memphis with
challenge
Mayor Wharton, who's also very much committed. He refers to this effort in Memphis as a survival strategy for the city. But when I was there in one day, again, the mayor's convening, but in one day I met with the presidents of all the higher education institutions in Memphis for lunch. I met with all the FedEx and all the foundation folks in the afternoon. I met with K. I mean, it was clear to what you're saying here. These folks didn't just come together to meet to see me. These people are meeting on a regular basis. This wasn't on the list of questions, but a lot of times when I know I spent my life in higher education. In the interest of full disclosure, I was vice president for academic affairs for the state higher ed system in Kentucky before coming to Louisville, so I was very familiar with a lot of the work of 55,000 degrees. But I think a lot of times I think higher ed is sort of this for a lot of folks in communities. It's this. I don't know what to call it. I mean, there's a positive feeling about it. You know, one of my PR friends says most people have a drive-by relationship with their higher ed. They drive by and say, that's the university, you know. But I know that the University of Louisville, Jefferson Community and Technical, I know they've been active players in this. So maybe a little bit about, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe everybody here is comfortable talking to the higher ed folks, but it's a bit of a black box for a lot of folks. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that engagement piece. Obviously higher ed's got to be in this game because they're the ones that have to get these people their degrees. So.
Right. You know, I think there's two aspects of that. One is that state and national policy was changing and driving much more attention. The same kind of attention that's been given to K-12 reform has, in the last 5-7 years, as you know, really focused on the poor outcomes of where our public dollars are going in higher education as well. I think people are shocked to learn that, you know, an average, I don't know what the 4-year graduation rate is average in our country, but it's probably something like
It's less than 60%. It's in the high 50s, and then if that's the average, then you know there's a significant number of institutions with 30, 20. There are community colleges with 10%.
Yeah, that's right. It's about 13%. Our
community college, and that's 150% of the normal time. So 3 years for community college, 6 years for 4-year for bachelor degrees. So you know. Partly that state was happening, and when we first started doing this locally, people were very happy to have sort of, let's all, you know, who's on first was the question often. There's all these different strategic plans out there. So being able to bring that together. We also had 2 states really involved, because Louisville is, and some of you may be like this, where reciprocity across the river into Indiana is, you know, so we have people attending colleges in both you know, Indiana and Kentucky. And so we needed to really have that local perspective. But the other thing that Kathy mentioned earlier was this importance of behind-the-scenes work. People needed, higher ed in particular, has their own, they're a very strange governance system. Faculty is totally in charge. You have to sort of make sure that you're addressing the issues of each one of those institutions. So we did a lot of pre-work before every meeting as we were getting started to really hear from people. We did interviewing that was one-on-one, and that really allowed, I think, some of these leaders to feel like they're going to be honored, and that their opinions, and it does. From the business community side, it definitely slows things down a bit, but it's worth it to be able to come to this common agreement.
Yeah.
Our experience with higher education was really at the community college level. From 2006 through 2009, we funded, along with UPS and the Annie Casey Foundation, a $1.2 million project called Changemakers, focusing on 4 disadvantaged neighborhoods in Louisville, offering an opportunity for people who hadn't had an opportunity to go to community college to enter JCTC with some additional services, some life skill services and so forth. So we had dipped our toes in the programmatic water around higher education, but realized that even with in our case, I think we invested about $450,000 over the 3-year period. We knew that $450,000 alone wasn't going to get the job done, and that we needed to look more from a systems perspective. But we were, quite frankly, shocked when I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is how risky it was for higher education to come to the table. They tend to guard their data, and their reputations are at stake, because you're really trying to, you know, you're competing on a national and international level, particularly with higher education institutions, and to come to the table and have a trust relationship. And I think I know 55,000 Degrees did the work properly, because the process was important to build trust and know that if Indiana University Southeast was sharing data, that the University of Louisville was going to share that data, and Sullivan University was going to share that data, and Spalding. So there were no surprises. It wasn't about exposés.
Right.
It was about improvement. I think that's very important.
Right. That's a really good point. I think that's when the focus is on getting better as opposed to slapping people around for not doing well enough.
Right. It's sort of mutual accountability. It was, and we often talk not only mutual accountability, but mutual beneficiality. You know, sort of mutual benefits that by all working together, we're going to all boats will rise. But there was also, and I can't underscore this enough, and you may want to add to this, Kathy. This, the tie to workforce. Universities sometimes resist this, but it's no question that most people go to college because they're looking to improve their career and their job prospects. And business was the most important voice at saying, we're not getting the skills and employees that we need, and to sort of make this clarion call for urgent action. Because and it's really the whole sort of global competitiveness. You're not competing any longer with even these cities that we compare ourselves to. We really should be comparing ourselves to, Shanghai's too big, but Bombay or
Singapore.
Bangalore or Singapore, even Dublin. We've got to look at how knowledge and skills can be transferred all around the world.
Let's talk for just a moment about, and I say this not just because we're funding it, but there's that pipeline with all the leakage. But Degrees at Work is an effort to try to reverse the flow of it and bring people back. As we've noted, there's in the country as a whole. But I'm going to do a plug here for Stronger Nation. We have our reports on our website. We do it every year. It's called Stronger Nation Through Higher Education. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it provides the education attainment data by state and by county in the state. And also this year, we broke that out by the top 100 metropolitan regions in the country. So it breaks it out by that. So when we were looking at that data for us, and I would say the Lumina's setting of its goal, 2025, 60%, was a very clarifying moment for us in terms of what our work, and it just as it did for you guys, it changed the way we thought about our work. But if you look at those numbers in every state, and by about 1/4 to 1/5 of the current workforce is in this some college, no degree category. It's about 36.2 million adults in the workforce nationally who went to college for these dropout rates. And we know that millions of them have 60 hours or more, and some of them have 90 hours or more. So maybe a little bit about that part of the population and what you're doing there, and it also, I think, the relevance of that to the point about workforce and the current workforce, because for most cities and for this country, even though we do have a fast-growing Latino population that needs to be, whose education needs need to be addressed, et cetera, but for the most part, if you want to know what the workforce of Louisville is going to look like in 10 years, or what the workforce of New Orleans is going to look like in 10 years, just look, or your city, just look around the room and imagine everybody 10 years older, because it's really, that's what it's going to be. So if you have an undereducated current workforce, you got a problem. So anyway, enough from me. This Degrees at Work piece, and why you took it on and what you're trying to do.
Well, let's start with the workforce issue first, and one of the challenges we face from an economic development office within the chamber, and that is the battle around, well, where are the jobs? And we would say, well, where's the education? So we continue to balance that out, and we just, with faith, hope, and just vision, are believing that if we improve the educational attainment in our community, and we know it, the jobs will be there. The jobs will come, our companies will grow, and companies will move into our community. So now the challenge of how do we make that happen? Excuse me. We were fortunate enough in the collaboration of the Mayor's Education Roundtable, 55K, our Business Leaders for Education group, which we had in place for a couple years since 2008, really began saying, what are we going to do? Post-secondary was right about something. At that point in time, the business community seemed to always just point fingers and not really get to the table and do something about it. And so we decided we would do something about it and started studying what would it take. What are companies out there that do just magnificent programs to help their employees get to school? What does that look like? So we wrote a grant to the Lumina Foundation to investigate that, research it, and then put it in place in our community. And we were fortunate to receive the grant, and we are now in our second year. We've named the program Degrees at Work. There'll be a slide. You'll see the little logo at the bottom there, and we've got a brochure on the table. The goal of this, and it's become, in my mind, we want to make a systems change in businesses. We want to systematically help a business realize what they are or are not doing to help their employees further their education, and then provide them with resources and materials that they can put in place at the work site to bring those individuals who have that some college, get them reinterested, or just say, here we are to help, and then move them back into post-secondary to help them get their degree, and then celebrate that success. Right now we have about 31 companies that are on board, and I will say, again, the most amazing thing is we have a survey out there that we survey the employee base. And from that survey, we're able to determine how many individuals, A, have a college degree already, so great, happy for them, how many are interested in getting their degree, and how many credit hours they have. So with that said, excuse me, we now can target who we're messaging to. So it's not like it's not the flavor of the month. It's a real systematic approach to 40, 50 employees at a company that says, hey, I hear you're interested in going back to school. Come to this information session. Here's some resources. Here's a website to go to. Here's an advisor that's a neutral college advisor to the 32 post-secondary institutions in our community. We can help you get in. And so that's what our Degrees at Work program is. In the end, what we want to do is we want to determine everything that a company's done, different things at different companies, put them all together and say, okay, here's the gold standard. You need to do all of these things to be at the top of the list. And then recognize and reward our businesses for doing that. And we already have some companies in our community that are very engaged in this process. And
Can you give an example of one? Tell a story about it.
Well, the one is Norton Healthcare, which is obviously it's a healthcare company, and they have, I would say easily, the last 10 years put a financial effort into making sure that they help their employees go from associate degree nursing to bachelor's degree to MSN, but not just to fill their pipeline in the healthcare field of direct patient care. They're also making sure that the folks in the business office are getting their accounting degrees, their bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and it's called Norton University, and it's a very, very systematic approach to the numbers of people that they put in and that they graduate every year. And they have agreements with local colleges and universities that college classes are taught in their offices, makes it more convenient for their employees. And they've recently struck a new deal that I'm going to really investigate how they pulled this off. But University of Phoenix is now offering free scholarships. So they offer 3 scholarships to Norton employees. So they set up a scholarship basis. So University of Phoenix is actually giving away a 4-year degree to 3 employees at Norton. So those are the things we want to replicate in other companies. We have a very small company on the website, Universal Woods, that their founder and CEO statement is, I want to spend my money helping my employees get a college degree. That's it's actually less expensive for me to do that than train them in-house. So we've got some remarkable stories out there, and our goal is just to get them told.
And, you know, I think one of the things that people, you were talking about the higher ed, sometimes discomfort with talking about workforce, but I think that's changing. I mean, I do sense, you know, that particularly probably the Great Recession is, if there's any gray lining to that dark cloud, it's people have begun to understand the necessity and those lines I was showing you in terms of what's happening to the job market. But I think another area of misunderstanding a lot of times when you get into this, and I think business people get it, but not everybody does, is a more educated workforce is a more productive workforce. Right. So it's not about figuring out I've got 18 slots and jobs that I need to fill, so let's educate 18 people to fill those jobs. When you generally educate your workforce, I mean, I don't know of an economic study anywhere that hasn't shown that that workforce becomes more productive. And what creates jobs is in greater productivity. So it's and the kinds of skills that I hear employers, and you can agree or disagree, it's not just learning how to make a widget. They want people who learn how to learn, who learn how to keep learning. They want people who can communicate what they're doing effectively to sometimes a very diverse group of folks. I mean, there are transferable skills that are fundamental, I think. Most faculty and universities would say, that's what we want our students to have. So I think sometimes we have to overcome a little bit of a misunderstanding about what this workforce, I mean, I don't know if you ran into any of that or not, but what this workforce emphasis is all about.
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have this table, because and the value of having some kind of round table in every community, I think, can really help have this conversation about what we really mean. Come to common agreement about what college readiness is, what workforce readiness is. You know, as you said, Jim, you know, there's been studies about what kinds of jobs we're going to need, you know, 10 and 12 years from now. But the truth is, we really don't know what those jobs are because things are changing so rapidly. So having this foundational skill and people understanding what some of those learning to learn, independence in learning, critical thinking, problem solving, and all those skills that can be taught in a variety of different ways, having that common agreement about that is so important. And if you have this table, I think it enables that conversation. The other thing that I would say is that this is also, at a local level, a way to sort of talk about the actual practice of implementing some of the state and national policies. I'm actually, I may be jumping, I know you had one of your questions here, what kind of ways do state policies impact? I'm actually on Friday speaking to one of the regional meetings of our Council on Post-Secondary Education, because they are very focused on their plan is called Stronger by Degrees, and they're very want to get community engagement more involved in this statewide goal. And one way to do that is to look at organizations like 55,000 Degrees. So that's what I'm going to be talking to them about, how they might be able to do that in other parts of Kentucky. And the value of it is that that's where the implementation has to happen. I was yesterday on the tour to see some of the schools in New Orleans. Some of you may have been there. And there was a comment about, from one of the state policymakers in Louisiana, even at K-12, of, you can set all these policies, but it really comes down to implementing them at the local level. So again, being able to do that with a convening of local groups of translating those policies into action is a key part of what we're doing.
Jim, I want to make a piggyback on something Kathy said. From the community foundation perspective, public education, looking at the deep drivers, education seemed like an important place for us to be. I think our attitude, and I can't speak for all the foundations in the community, but I think workforce development, no, we weren't. That wasn't something, that was GLI's business and the business communities. We couldn't even begin to think about how we might play a role in workforce development, so we stayed out of it until just a couple of years ago when we've dipped our toes in the water. We had some money set aside in the educational, some grant-making money in addition to the 55,000 Degrees money. And when we get a request for some money to assist with workforce development plan, initially I think we said, well, that's not our business. We're focused on public education. And I'll say that our grants committee and our board members were skeptical. And it took 2 visits back. Typically we go out and do site visits and so forth, but we invited the Workforce Development Board to come in. We presented to them. They came in twice to meet with board members and committee members so that they could help us make the connection for our board between the public education and the workforce development. And that, in fact, we weren't having mission drift, that they were, in fact, connected. And these are very, very well-informed board members who just took them a little bit of time to make that connection. And I'm pleased to say we did make the grant. It was a difficult road for us. We did make the grant. It was a 2-year commitment. So now I feel, from a board perspective and as the CEO with staff and so forth, that the work's been done and there's no longer, we talk about silos in the community foundation field. We don't see these as separate. They're very connected.
Well, let me, this isn't on the list, but I want to, you were talking about different, obviously the adults we've talked about, and what we're trying to do is a heavy employer engagement. I know as you're looking at that pipeline and who's dropping out, it's not randomly distributed who's dropping out. Right. I mean, if we look at, I mentioned this when we had the Community Foundation meeting in Indianapolis. If you look at the 2010 census, when you look at 24-year-olds, which would be post-college, in the upper income quartile, 4 out of 5 have a 4-year college degree. If you're born into a wealthy family, you almost have to jump off the boat and tie a rock around your leg to not end up on the college shore, right? Mm-hmm. Among the lowest income quartile, 1 out of 10 has a 4-year college degree. And then you pair back and look at those lines that I threw up there, what's happening to the job market and the economy. And unless you believe somehow, for a city that's trying to build its talent, both around race and ethnicity, income, you mentioned affordability, of course, is an issue. I mean, are there specific ways you're messaging, specific targets you're using? And I'm asking this because I don't know the answer. Around those issues for Louisville.
So I can mention one in particular. Race is another issue in terms of those statistics of people of color have a much lower graduation rate and a percentage of their population. And in fact, and again, this goes back to the importance of data. One of the other studies that the Greater Louisville Project did was to break down this education attainment by race. And as you saw, we were sort of in the lower tier of cities overall, Well, in African American attainment, we were dead last, tied with Memphis. So Memphis also has the same issues that we do. The African American leaders that were at the table were very, very concerned about this data and really reacted saying this can't stand, and built into our Greater Louisville Education Commitment specific goals around race and diversity and achievement and narrowing that historic gap. And so they set a goal of 15,000 of those 55,000 being attained by African Americans. And they've actually formed a group, a working group. They've sort of taken their first claim on. They were the first group to stand up and say, we're going to take part of those degrees and be responsible for them. Probably the most profound activity that's happened is the faith community in the African American community that has bonded together to say churches have to help as well. They're putting in Saturday academies. They're at every one of their conferences that they have, they're talking about the importance of college education. They're reaching out to their own members, congregation, to improve their own and then support them in moving forward. So that's one group, and then I would also say that there is an effort in our community that Metro United Way is leading. That is a sort of cradle-to-career pipeline, and they're working with, some of you may be working with Ready by 21, a sort of insulated pipeline that we have to, that it's not just the academic part that moves you through the pipeline, but all those other support services to do wraparound, and so they're very focused on how do we make sure that there are more of those support services all along that pipeline.
You know, it's interesting talking about disaggregating the data. I think for some communities, and I don't know if any of our friends from Boston are here or not, but when I went to the Boston meeting, of course the mayor is involved there and the Boston Foundation heavily involved, but Boston is one of the most, in aggregate, one of the most educated cities, the second, I think, most educated city in the country. But when they disaggregated their data, and I shared some of this again at the convening that we had, they began to look, and the story was not as pretty as one might. I mean, there were just egregious inequities in the way that was being accomplished. And so by doing that, here's a city that, you could take a look at the overall data and say, what are we worried about? We're the second most educated city in America. But I don't know what to call it, feet of clay, I guess is what I would call it, in terms of what was actually happening to particularly students of color, low-income students in the Boston area. It wasn't a pretty picture, but again, they didn't use it to go after anybody. They were trying to use it as an improvement device.
And that was the Boston Community Foundation that funded that study.
Right, right.
Did that study.
Yeah.
You mentioned the United Way. Traditionally, I've been in the community foundation field since 1999, and in 3 different communities: Rhode Island, York, Pennsylvania, and now in Louisville, Kentucky. And a question always comes up from CEO to CEO: how's your relationship with the United Way? And I've always had a good relationship, but here, when we came to Louisville and we were looking at 55,000 degrees, I had a sense that there might be some of this, competition. Where do you? And they certainly had more dollars than we did, and had a long-standing commitment to supporting public education through their allocation process and through their discretionary funds. So Joe Cholin, who is head of the United Way in Louisville, and I got together, and we talked as part of our overall education planning, what else could we do? We're funding 55,000 degrees. We're one of the funders, as well as some other projects. And we combined and we put out a grant-making program to tackle some of the other areas in the pipeline. And I can't exactly remember how much it was, but a couple of $100,000 to really look at each of those 5 areas: early childhood, elementary, after-school care, and invited nonprofits to apply for what we called mini grants. What that did, I think we funded about 36 nonprofits. We didn't ask them to create anything new. We said, what are you doing already, and what can you add to it to create either the college-going culture, particularly at the early stages, because this program, because of the time frame, wanting to get graduates out of college by a certain time, we're not necessarily focusing on the early grades. What it's turned out to be, a pretty small amount of funding, has turned into these nonprofits working together beyond our funding period and looking at ways that they can share information about how the Boys and Girls Club or Big Brothers Big Sisters or other supporting organizations can really help be part of this project without signing up, if you will.
Right. I think it was very intentional and explicit. It was brilliant, really, to require that these groups meet together so that at each transition point there were about 5 different grantees or 5 or 10, something like that, at each one of these transition points, and so they were to meet at least twice a year, and that's what's happened, is developed a sort of best practice professional learning community around each of those transition points, and has continued. And we've been able to actually build on that with some ongoing idea swap and shops, we call them, to continue those conversations.
We called it turning up the heat because we're trying to play off the 55,000 degrees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about everybody. So we've partnerships, public-private, but a little bit about results, how you're measuring your progress, how you plan to measure it. Where are you, and where do you see it going? A little bit around outcomes.
So one of the most important things we knew we had to do right away was to set a benchmark, and we published at our launch a benchmark report, and we're now doing an annual progress report. We brought some, they're around on the tables, but you can also get on our website and see an area that's called reports and go to the 2011 annual report. We'll be putting another one out in about maybe a month. I'm hoping a month. So what this is it measures our overall goal. So as a population, how are we moving forward? The bottom line is we are going up, but not at the rate we need to, so we must accelerate attainment. We're also looking at indicators in each one of those objectives that I mentioned, so things like high school graduation rates and college graduation rates, but also what's the net price of college in our community, and who's doing the access work, how many employers are engaged in degrees at work. We're looking at a number of those indicators, and we're also not only doing this annually, but we've put it on our website as a data dashboard that can allow people to dig deep. So the annual report measures our community level. It's sort of an aggregate of all the institutions, but on our website you can go into each school, each high school, each college, and get the data on that as well. So that really has become, in many ways, the most powerful aspect is getting that data in front of everybody so we all know what we're working from.
That goes to the transparency. I think that's so important. As the mom of a high school student, thinking about Louisville has so many choices at the high school level, but I was able to go online and see what the graduation rates were, see how the different schools were doing, and as far as I know, that wasn't possible before. And
not easily. I mean,
not easily.
You had to know how to dig through the state websites.
And I just found it fascinating, and I think the idea that there's trust and all in it together, not just one high school or one university. Everyone's putting their data on board.
And you said, what are the outcomes? By doing this data, it allowed us to sort of focus on where are the biggest challenges, and we do this partly also for our funding table that wants to know, so where should we be putting our dollars as well? And the 3 things we've said to them over this last year is, 1, we're not accelerating fast enough. 2, that so help us, with the message of how urgent this is. 2, we have far too many people that aren't college ready when they leave high school, so how can we focus on this college readiness while they're still in the K-12 system? We must increase, all of those extra and wraparound services. Then 3 is that we have many more people. The good news is many more adults coming back to school. But, as you know, higher ed is not always that good at dealing with, the non-traditional student who has to work, who has kids, who, has different needs. And so how do we help the universities change and offer better solutions for the adult working student?
I think that's another part of helping people understand who is it we're trying to serve. Lumina has, from its outset, always, this mission has not changed, which is to help more low-income, first-generation students of color, adult learners come back. I think what has changed in terms of the makeup of higher education, and I know a lot of people don't get this, inside the Beltway in Washington as well as around the states, is that less than 20% of the students going to higher ed right now are full-time, living in a dorm, you know, like my son. It's a shrinking minority. And so we've started saying, look, that's the 21st century student, the adult coming back, the first generation student. All the growth in our population is in Latino, African American, students of color. I mean, this is the future of American higher education. So trying to get higher ed to be ready for these students and take responsibility for their success, and to do that at the community level, I think, is a big challenge, but it's necessary.
So one of the things we're doing with the Degrees at Work program is we're seeking out those universities that have adult-friendly programs. And we're saying, okay, University of Louisville, whatever university it might be, you've got an adult-friendly program. That looks good. We need a single point of contact for this employee to talk to, because once we get into the maze of a university or even a community college system, it's so easy to get lost. Or customer service might not be where it needs to be. Does anybody call me back? We actually had one of our employees that wanted to finish she got an associate's degree and wanted to finish her bachelor's degree at the university. And, you know, she made 3 phone calls and they never called her back, so she just finished it where she was. So it's those kinds of things that we have to help bring to light and then work together to change, because I think there's a lot of work for everybody to do. The adult needs to get better prepared. They need to understand what it is. What does it mean to go back to college and that type of thing. So it's both sides.
Yeah, yeah. So in thinking about going forward, what do you see as the biggest challenge? I mean, we need to accelerate. You've noted that. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that you're going to have to be paying attention to going forward now to really push and accelerate toward this 55,000 degrees?
I'm sure
that's open to everybody.
I'm sure everybody has a comment, but I'll start us off saying, you know, we've done I think a really good job of bringing this to the forefront in the community. Many people now talk about 55,000 degrees and sort of think of that as the umbrella goal in the education sphere for our community and in workforce when we're talking about that. So, you know, the importance of college and improving our college system, our college production system that starts, you know, at birth all the way cradle to career. And so that's happened. But now we're at the nitty-gritty, and the data has helped us understand where our real challenges are. But we're talking about both systems changes and 1 degree at a time. This whole idea that it's all about personal help. So how do we connect mentors with students? How do we help mentors be trained to know that this is something that's going to take a lot of time and energy, and it's going to last over a while to have an impact. So, you know, we're really trying to highlight some of those, and so I think that nitty-gritty work is the biggest challenge.
I would say that I think that we have a challenge in our messaging. I think that we have to infiltrate the entire community, every zip code area, every student in school, every adult, every business, and I think that's a huge challenge. I think that we have opportunities to learn from others, and one of the things that I just think is critical is nothing we are doing is, in a sense, new. It is all out there. We're just taking what we can learn from other communities. Generation Texas has some great data that they did on kids and how kids receive messaging. Graduate Philadelphia has been in the business a long time helping adults return to school and get their degrees. So I think 2 things. One is we've got to get our messaging out. That's a challenge. And the other is being able to go out there, talk to people that are doing what we're doing, take from them what works in our community, and then make it work in our community. And we've been doing that within our own community. I know that Mary Gwen had mentioned the faith community and our African American community. They literally went in and we had produced some materials for Degrees at Work, and they just took the degrees, we sent them to PDFs, and they just changed it a little bit, made it look a little different, and just put it out there so that they didn't have to do that work ahead of time. They could use what was out there, and I think that's critical that we have to remember too.
I think for us, this is a message that I'm targeting to my CEO colleagues, community foundation colleagues, CEOs and program staff, board members. 3 years ago when we designed our strategic plan, we did what we called a spectrum, and we asked staff, board members, and the community where they thought we were as a community foundation. And if you think about the spectrum, and and donor-centric here and community-centric here, that at that point we were about right here. And it was interesting because staff, board, and people in the community were all on target. The X's were all over on that side. When we asked, where do you think we should be within a 5-year period? First, staff and board came over to this side. Then we went out and asked community leaders and partners where we should be. And we were very, very nervous. You know, it's one of those be careful what you ask for, because they had been over here. And what if they said, you need to stay right here? So, but what we found, to our relief, and really it affirmed, is that they saw us over here. Remember, over here? They saw us as being more community-centered. So a project like 55,000 Degrees, we decided then that we were going to put money on the table, put some staff on the table, and do some things that were a little bit out of the ordinary for us. And I think the challenge for us is now we're in our 2nd year. Do we see ourselves, you mentioned the flavor of the month. You know, what I'm not hearing from board members is, what are we going to do next? I think as a community foundation, we have about $121 million in endowed assets, a couple of $100 million in non-endowed, but I think we're in a position to sort of stay the course. And I'm hoping, we're kind of looking at, I'm framing it as sustaining partnerships, Greater Louisville project being one of them, and this being one of them, a sustaining partnership that's built into our budget, our grant-making budget, not without some review and rigorous review. But the thing is, we're not asking Mary Gwen and 55,000 Degrees to come give us a report once a year. We're involved. We go to the meetings. Well, they're in our offices. So the review is constant. So I think for us, what we've seen is the dollars have paid off in terms of being able to invest in an initiative. We're now at the table. We didn't come out and say, we're a community leader now. We had to kind of move with it. And one of our senior philanthropists in the community said in one of the interviews we had during our strategic plan that the foundation had to put some money on the table and had to be at the table. And I wouldn't say we're fully into the community leader. I think we'll see this come out over the next couple of years. But I think if you ask staff and board members today, the movement is there from our perspective. And again, I'm just speaking from what we've gained. And I can't imagine doing business any other way. In fact, I think with impact investing and some of the other things we're looking at, we're going to do more than we ever thought possible, not only with this project, but with other projects throughout the Metro Louisville area.
So I want you to be thinking about questions. We're about ready to move into an opportunity for you to ask. Again, if you can come up to the microphone, if you shout it out, we'll repeat it here since the thing's being recorded. But I want you to be, but before I go to questions and while you're thinking about them, let me just say that from our perspective at the Lumina Foundation, right now, we see this regional community-based effort as hugely important to our work and connecting the dots. We mentioned the state work in Kentucky. Well, I have a list with me of the 25 states that have set aggressive goals for state education attainment. And there are people working on that at the state level. So connecting, if you're in a community in one of those states, connecting the dots so that I know in Kentucky, for example, when the state reform went in, the University of Louisville's mandated goal was to become a premier metropolitan research university. Did I get that? That's right. Okay.
You got it.
Well, they had a 38% 6-year graduation rate. Nobody is going to talk about the University of Louisville in the same breath as the University of Pittsburgh if they have a 38% graduation rate. So your point, one of my lines is also...
They are now 51%.
Yes, exactly. Huge progress.
In about 8 years. So.
But making sure that goal, as they're pursuing it, is integrated. I know you've done this. Integrated into and a part of and supporting the 55,000 Degrees is important. And so I think knowing we're funding the National League of Cities to expand, we just gave them another grant because it's going so well, to expand into more cities, because what we're finding is what you all were saying. In almost every city we go to, there are lots of things going on around education attainment. The word's getting out there. But it's sort of 1,000, or maybe not 1,000, but a lot of random acts of excellence. And in some cases, the entities that are working on it are not only not collaborating, they're competing against one another for attention and resources. So this bringing together, as you all have done here, is really important. And Susan, the role you laid out, well, several points, of the Community Foundation in being that place, that neutral ground where these different parties can come in. You know, I've never believed that altruism was a sustainability strategy. And as long as people think I'm doing this for the grant from Lumina or I'm doing it at cost to my organization, you got a problem. But when people can begin to see how all boats can rise under this, and I think community foundations play a crucial role. You mentioned United Way. We've got a grant with United Way Worldwide to do a planning grant to think about those wraparound services. And how can United Way, with its Ready by Other, how can it make college readiness and college going an important strand of work? So we're interested in linking to the community foundation sector because we believe that all of you can play a very important role, and some of it's been outlined here today, in helping, even if you do fund early childhood or you fund predominantly or elementary or high school after school, to be a force in your community to say, that's the end goal. That's what we've got to do. Now, here's where we are with our funding, our work, but we want to be a player and in the community to help get everybody at the table that needs to be at the table to, as you said, I think, insulate that pipeline so it's not leaking at that level, because that is not atypical. I suspect if most of you have looked at your data in most of the communities here, that is a pretty typical picture of the way things operate. So we're very interested in hearing from you about how we can be supportive of creating a learning community, if you would, among community foundations. And you mentioned Graduate Philadelphia and the work in Texas, because, again, we don't need to be reinventing wheels here, and we need to be collaborating and sharing information with this idea of continuous improvement. So that's our interest as a national foundation. I know I've talked to many of you. We are working hard with the council foundations and learning from great work like that in Louisville and other cities to try and figure out how we can play a supportive role, whether it's how do you design your scholarship programs most effectively as a foundation so that they are in fact moving students who might not otherwise, who are ready for college, who might not otherwise have the opportunity. We have, so that we're not giving, in many states and many institutions are giving lots of scholarship money to students who are going to go to college anyway, and a lot of students can't without it. So what's the smartest things we know now about how to design scholarship programs that would impact this pipeline in a positive way? So that's our interest here. So I don't know if there's any final comments you want to make, or you all want to make before we turn it over to questions or not.
I would like to just share with you a picture I saw yesterday, because I think it illustrates that we are at a very unique inflection point where you have those who care about economic prosperity and are making economic arguments are talking about education. And those who care about social justice are talking about education as the key opportunity to improve social justice. And so everybody's talking about college. I took this picture yesterday at outside of a K-12, a kindergarten first grade building where to enter into the first grade and kindergarten building, this is the sign the kids see. Yay. Okay.
All right, well, thanks. And, yes, question. We can't see you very well, but we know you're there, so go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, well, thank you, and good morning. This is a great story, and I appreciate your sharing, and I congratulate you on what you're doing in Louisville and at Lumina. I'm Will Ginsberg from New Haven, Connecticut, and college access, college success has emerged in our community as the highest community priority. New Haven Promise, which is a program to build a college-going culture, support graduates of New Haven Public Schools to go to college with scholarships of up to full tuition, is housed at the Community Foundation, which I run, and it's our largest commitment as a community foundation. Yale University is paying for the scholarships. It's the largest programmatic commitment they've ever made in New Haven. Lots of other players are involved, and it is the community priority in our community. What's so interesting in contrast to what you're doing, there's a lot in common, obviously. What's interesting to me in contrast to the Louisville story is that in our community, the starting point, the linchpin for this and the starting point for it is K-12 school reform, is the recognition in the public schools, in the mayor's office, and indeed in every corner of the community that we have to do better in educating young people. We have to have higher standards of academic achievement in the public schools. And I don't think New Haven Promise or any of the other elements of what's happening in our community around this would be happening were it not for a very ambitious school reform program in partnership with the New Haven Federation of Teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, where's the K-12 piece? You mentioned it, but really actually only in passing. The public schools aren't on the stage. Where's the K-12 piece? And is there a reform effort going on in Louisville of the kind that we're seeing in our community and that is happening all around the country? And how does that fit into what you've described so well this morning?
It's very key and important, and there's been a lot of, one of the why we end up talking about higher ed as much as we did is because there was a lot of finger pointing at the K-12 system as being the only reason why we have such bad college graduation and attainment rates. So having people at the table to really talk about, well, it's not just the K-12 failures, it's also that things weren't aligned. It's also that our higher ed we're not producing the teachers and the quality of teachers that we needed. So everybody had a role to play here. Probably the most dramatic impact of our data dashboard was being able to compare high school graduation rates, high school college readiness rates, which in our state is mandated that everybody take the ACT in their junior year. And that actually the whole, the Explore in 8th grade, the Plan in 10th, and the dramatic difference between what we were saying was how many students were proficient and how many were actually college ready according to the ACT was big news, and that was a very important. So I'd say that one of the most encouraging aspects about 55,000 degrees is that this goal is now built into the K-12 strategic plan. We have a new superintendent. She's only been there about a year.
I think that's key, the superintendent.
And and part of the reason we have a new superintendent is because achievement rates were not strong. And so she took time to do a sort of study of what was going on, but really built into this community-developed strategic plan a very clear college going rate, a college readiness rate, that then back maps to all of the pieces before. We're also a little bit ahead of the game in Kentucky because we were mandated by our legislature to put globally benchmarked standards in and test to them this year. So not only were we the first state to adopt the Common Core standards, but all of our teachers have been trained in them over the last few years, and they were implemented this past year and tested past May. So in October we'll be releasing those studies, and what we will see and what we're trying to prepare our community for is the fact that we will see the percentage of students who are proficient drop by 30 or 40%. So this is going to be, I think you're going to watch Kentucky, seeing how we deal with this dramatic raising of standards. And as every community is going to be doing, at least of the 47 or so states that have adopted the Common Core, you'll be testing to it by 2014 at the latest. It's going to be an experience that we're going to be able to shed a little light on.
And let me add to that, with the support of the K-12 system, the Chambers has been working with the superintendent and the school board easily for the last 10-plus years. But because of 55K, we now, when we sit down and we talk about, we're trying to implement the Common Core, we got a whole promotion, publicity, speaking engagements to raise the awareness of Common Core state standards in this alignment. We're at the table with the superintendent and her communication staff from the Chamber perspective, 55K perspective in the mayor's office, and that's made a real difference. It's that this work that we're doing, we can collaborate beyond what we should be doing. It's almost like, wow, we need to help. We need to be right there with them and helping. So I think that we have been engaged in the K-12 system and really asking the tough questions like why aren't all of our high schools achieving at the levels they need to achieve?
Question, yes.
David Snyder, Richmond, California Community Foundation. Can you speak a little bit about anywhere where within state tax credits they're being utilized to offset the cost of corporations for having employees finish their degrees, and potentially where they're actually making those incentives and tax credits available once an individual employee has completed the degree?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can get that information to you. I'm not sure I can give you a complete answer right here off the top of my head, but I do think there are examples where there have been efforts, some more successful than others, to provide tax credits to businesses. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But.
Well, we have a pretty interesting model in Louisville that preceded all of this work. We call it Metropolitan College. It emerged with state and city help to UPS when they they were having great trouble filling their night shift, and they were looking to move their world port, as they call it, somewhere else for this distribution center. We're one of the main distribution centers for UPS in the country. And we all rallied together, and what UPS, in conjunction with the government, said is, let's give a different benefit, and so they're paying 100% of a college tuition for anybody who works in the night shift. This Metropolitan College now has had over 8,000 people get degrees through UPS supporting them, and in fact their turnover rate went from something like 70 or 80% to like 5%. So they're really it's almost hard for them to move people on. They want to stay and work at UPS until they finish their degree and even beyond. That example has been very catalytic in the rest of the state for the value of education as being an economic incentive. And there has been discussion, and they've actually changed it from a direct appropriation to a tax incentive. For UPS, what we're trying to do is figure out how to expand that to businesses beyond UPS.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Teresa Erickson with the Greater Pine Belt Community Foundation in Mississippi, Hattiesburg. My question is, even in Mississippi, our overall blueprint, what we call Blueprint Mississippi, it's all based on early childhood. We've not really focused in more on this aspect of it, and I can see how it would be a great combination. But I'm from a very, very small community foundation. We don't have the discretionary funds. So my question is, as a community foundation, how have you been, or have you at all been, messaging that out to businesses and communities to have them partner, to give donations? Are you doing any kind of fundraising for the program? Any messaging out to help have your community collaborate with you?
I can take that. No messaging out in terms of having them help fund the program. We do have foundation partners, and all the foundation partners are contributing. I think one of the things that 55,000 Degrees is 3 employees, 4 employees. So I think that's important to know. They're all on our, they're on our team in our offices. But I think the beauty of 55,000 Degrees and why the small amount of money that we're contributing at that level is it says these things are already in place in the community. What 55,000 Degrees is doing is really a mini Greater Louisville project, taking all the data, taking all the work, and putting it together so that people who already have the talent and have the resources can put them to work in an environment that says we trust you, we share, and we learn together. We're really just, our commitment is about $50,000 a year to the project. So we are not spending, we're investing in other projects as well, but it's a resource allocation from our perspective, $150,000 over 3 years. So I suggest that while we're a large foundation, that really we're making as much impact as we can. I think you'd think we're putting more money in, and I think Mary Gwen would wish we'd put more. But quite frankly, what happens in our community is it's not one foundation. It's when 5 or 6 parties are each contributing that kind of money, then things can really happen. I don't know if that helps.
I would add to that what 55,000 Degrees is doing is sort of setting a community agenda. We've been very, we've found a lot of resonance in the model that Strive Network, some of you may be familiar with out of Cincinnati, that there's been a study done calling it, this is a collective impact sort of approach where you have this common measurement system, a shared agenda, a backbone organization, good communications. And the key that we keep coming back to is mutually aligned activities. It's not a plan where we're telling everybody what to do. What we're doing is saying, here's the common goal, and if we can all align in these individual activities and be sort of heading in the same direction instead of lots of different directions, then we have that greater impact. So there's no question that early childhood education has probably it's been shown that it's got the biggest return on dollar invested, and so that's going to be an important part for our community long term. We haven't focused some of our specific dollars because we have this 2020 goal, and kids won't be old enough to have got a degree by then. But strengthening early childhood is critical to improving the overall pipeline and its system. So everybody has a role. Metro United Way in our community is really taking the lead on that early childhood piece. And the school system is working with the city and Metro United Way again in out-of-school time for the other parts of the pipeline. They've got a new sort of approach calling improving resiliency of kids, and that they need the whole community to help with that. So there's a role in every part of the way. The key is to have that overarching vision and goal. Where are you going?
Yeah, I think if you haven't, most of you probably have looked at the initial piece and the follow-ups on that collaboration for collective impact. That's a model we're funding in a lot of cities around the country because, again, as Mary Gwen so eloquently described it, we're finding there's lots of things going on, and the whole pipeline needs to be addressed. My wife just retired after 39 years with low-income and developmentally delayed kids in early childhood, so I'm a deep believer in the importance of early childhood. But what role, how are you going to set that goal, use your data to identify where you need to be focusing attention and get the aligned activities? So from early childhood, even before early childhood issues, how do you get that in place so that you really do have an insulated pipeline where we're not just bleeding out, probably mixing metaphors there, but anyway, bleeding out so many people before they ever get the chance. And to carry the message, as I think you as community foundations are uniquely positioned to do, that the finish line has changed. It's not just about high school graduation anymore. Yes, early childhood, and we've got to look at all these points, but ultimately the end line, and I think the data just is indisputable on this, without some form of quality post-secondary, college, call it what you want, degree or credential, in this workforce, as it's changing, a high school credential by itself is a ticket to being working poor in most areas. So how do you do that on the Common Core? There will be a dip. Yep. How do you as a community foundation and a trusted member of the community help people, along with business leaders and others, hold the line and say, yep, the news is ugly, but if we stay the course, it will get better. We can't retreat, because if we retreat, we're back to where we were, and that's an unsatisfactory place to get. So I think we are about at our witching hour. I want to thank the panel for coming and sharing their ideas about what's happening in Louisville.